Okay, so this is Pilots Squawking, a podcast about flying, the people who do it, and what it's really like behind the headset. I'm Dale, and in each episode, I sit down with pilots from across aviation, from students to instructors and beyond, to hear their stories, their experiences, and the lessons they've learned along the way. Today, I'm joined by Geoff Cockrell, better known as the Flying Dark Lord, an aviation content creator, a pilot who many of you have probably recognized from YouTube and other social media channels. We're going to talk about flying, aviation culture, content creation, aircraft ownership, and some of the realities of general aviation in the UK. So, Geoff, welcome to Pilots Squawking, and thanks for being a guest on the podcast.
Hi, Dale. It's really good to be with you. I feel it. This all feels a bit surreal, really. But it's great to see you again.
Yeah, it's great to have you on. So I think the best place probably to start is, at least for me, the obvious question is, where did the Flying Dark Lord come from?
Well, it's a bit more of a boring story than people are hoping, because it started off really with. Well, I'm old enough now to come from a time that predates the internet. So when the internet first sort of became a thing, we all got into email addresses. And one of the things that was the case was that you had your email address assigned to you by the provider that supplied your email. For example, nowadays, if you had a mobile phone, that might be O2 or Orange or whatever that gives you your mobile number. But for me, my AOL login was something like DKLD2364 or whatever. And so to remember it, I just thought I'll just call it Dark Lord, because it was an easy way of remembering. And then, of course, Google came around and YouTube, and eventually you think of something to call yourself, and I stuck that on without giving it too much of a thought. And then eventually I find myself in a position where I'm a 55-year-old man with a ridiculous YouTube channel name, but it just kind of stuck, and so I've just rolled with it, really. So yeah, not particularly exciting.
I think that's interesting, because I never would have guessed that, is the honest answer.
Yeah, it's a lot more benign. I think people are always hoping that there's something, a little bit more interesting and to it, or something deeper than that. But it is really something quite basic and a little bit disappointing, I would imagine.
I had a similar one, again, back to being older and when the internet first came. Obviously, I have got my actual name as an email address for somewhere, but then you get the stupid ones, don't you? And then one day you think, oh, it might be a bit more professional to use my name than, widget at AOL.com or something.
And it's just a way that I used to remember it, but there we go. And so yeah, I'm stuck with it. But it's always an interesting point, and I think as well because it looks a little bit more enigmatic, people are interested and it draws them in a bit. But I remember actually landing at an airfield, and somebody sort of sidled up to me and said to me, "Look, we're just interested to know where the name came from." So obviously I relayed the story, and they said, "Oh, that's not what we thought. We thought that you were involved in some kind of weird underground scene from London." And so I was a bit surprised to hear that, but I thought, well, actually, that sounds quite cool. Maybe I'll roll with that in the future rather than the AOL story, which is the truth.
Yeah, that's a new story. Yeah. So how then did you get into flying then?
Well, it's kind of a long and short story to that. When I was a teenager, I really, really wanted to be a pilot. And I even thought about joining the RAF. My grandfather was in the RAF, and I thought, oh, it'd be so cool to be a pilot. But obviously, because I wear glasses, when I spoke to the chaps from the recruiting for the RAF, they advised me that because of my vision, it would be unlikely that I'd be an RAF pilot. So then, a little bit disillusioned with what I should do, I decided to then become a mechanic, a ground engineer. And so I joined a local flying school where I was just a kind of like a mechanic's mate, fetching the tools and what have you for a local airfield, which was at that stage Shoreham Airport. And it was for a company called Air South. They've since disappeared. It was owned by a couple called John and Jenny Pothecary. But they were great aircraft enthusiasts. So at that stage, I was fascinated by aircraft, and all I did at that stage was clean the aircraft, help them with maintenance, do the annual checks, etc. And then as life moved on, I kind of set it aside, but I never ever gave up on my dream of being a pilot. And then as I've gone through my career, it's basically my job has consumed my life, and I've not really had time to engage in many hobbies. And as now I've reached a point where everything is stabilized and life is a little calmer and more structured, and I know how to get a better work-life balance, I really felt that it was something I wanted to return to. So I did just that. And actually, it was going to one of the Popham microlight trade fairs with one of my friends, a chap called Nick Farley. He was also keen to learn to fly. And we went to the event together and looked at the aircraft. And eventually we kind of both ended up going for lessons in slightly different places. And then the rest is history. And I got my NPPL because I think it's one of the best routes into flying. And I've loved it. And I never look back. And I'm so pleased that I did it.
And so, do you have any additional? Well, there's a couple of questions about the NPPL, and I'm rusty on this bit. So I have the PPL. So, do you have an NPPL-A or an NPPL-M?
So mine is an NPPLA, so it's basically for aircraft.
Right. Okay.
The reason why I chose to go for the NPPL over the PPL was mostly to do with the fact that when I think about the type of flying that I want to do, it is on fair weather days, so that I can enjoy the countryside, enjoy the scenery. And although I think it's really, really important to push yourself, what I don't want to do is to find myself flying in conditions which are a little bit more dangerous, whether that's through cloud on bad weather days or even at night. And that being the case, the MPPL seemed like the natural choice, on top of which it is significantly less expensive to achieve. And also there are less stringent medical rules. Although I'm in good health at the moment and I have no issues, it just made life a lot easier. And I think that there are enough expenses in aviation without the need to incur further expenses. And I think if you have the goal of pursuing, say, for example, some kind of commercial venture with your license, then the PPL is the way to go. But I think for people like me who are recreational aviators, then the MPPL is just a beautiful way of getting into the air. And there are so many amazing aircraft that you can fly these days that are fast, sleek, that look amazing, without having to, fly heavier or more expensive aircraft. So that's why the MPPL I thought was the way forward.
Yeah, I think you probably did better homework than I did. Just, I think when I was learning, I was aware of the NPPL, and this is in my head. I don't know where it came from. My brain just went, "No, if you're going to be a pilot, the proper thing is the PPL." No more really understanding as to why I had that belief, but I think definitely I don't do regrets. But what I would
Yes,
definitely recommend to other people is, unless you want to have some form of
the
commercial
career.
career, yeah, and I think
Yeah.
depending on what we discuss, I think there's a lot of lacking of clarity around that as well in aviation. There's more to being just a pilot or an airline pilot, but I would definitely recommend to people that they go the MPPL route for, like you said, the cost. And then even,
Yes.
I know you have the airplane one, but like, with the EuroFoxes and things, some of the microlights, their capability,
Oh,
that's even
incredible.
more of an option, isn't it? That, so none of this stuff is cheap, but there are
No.
cheaper ways of, like you said, fulfilling the dream and not having to win the lottery to do it.
Exactly. And I think that's what's nice about the NPPL route. I think, though, that is a common misconception. And I think it's born out of the fact that the microlight world has changed significantly over many decades, because originally it was designed to help people who wanted a nice inexpensive way of flying. And it started out, of course, with the flex wings. And they are what I think people think of nowadays when you mention a microlight. But even going to shows like Popham and Friedrichshafen and the variety of aircraft now with retractable undercarriages and fast engines, even fighter-like configurations, it's remarkable. So I think, yes, I think you're right. The PPL, though, there are advantages, and my argument against myself is that it is very, very helpful to do other ratings like your instrument rating. And I think, though, although I've alluded to the fact that I would prefer to fly in fair weather conditions, I think it's prudent to push yourself and gain additional training to give yourself a much broader basin of of skill and knowledge, and so that you can cope if you ever find yourself in a situation where perhaps your capabilities might otherwise have run out. But then there's a counter argument that you shouldn't really get yourself into trouble in the first place anyway. But,
Yeah.
you know,
No, he makes a
life
valid
doesn't always
point.
work that way.
Yeah. I think even now, just recently doing the microlight conversion, I'll be honest, before kind of educating myself, I thought microlight was just the glidery thing with an engine in it. Like, and I think even when you say to people, "Oh, I've started flying microlights," they're like, "Oh, I thought you wanted to fly planes." Oh,
That's
look,
right.
and you showed them a picture. They're like, "Oh, it looks just like a plane." Well, it is. I
Yeah, I
think,
think people are sometimes quite surprised when you tell them what it is that you do for a hobby, and then they see the pictures or see the videos even. And yeah, so it's I think it's fantastic, and the NPPL gives so many advantages. I think, and people often ask me, how much does it cost? And my response is it costs the same as a good quality German car to both buy and run. And I think that is quite a good marker of the expense that would be involved in microlights. Because I've not really had a PPL, but I've heard a great deal about it. I know that the costs rise significantly with certified aircraft. So, and I've heard some very frightening figures being mentioned as in terms of maintenance and learning to fly
yeah.
them and ownership. So, I think NPPL is a great it's a great way of getting into aviation.
I think you mentioned it a moment ago that if I compare, the Cessna 172 that I fly, which if you're not watching, you don't know I'm doing air quotes now, is a proper aeroplane, right?
That's right.
It's like 50 years old, and then you look at, like you said, a modern microlight class aircraft, glass cockpit, ballistic parachutes, nice comfy seats,
Yes. Yeah.
and it's like,
Heating.
well, what what is the what's the safer thing to be in, right? And I think, yes, obviously they're much lighter weight than microlights, but I think a modern microlight is a safer proposition than a 50-year-old. They're still very nice aircraft, but it's
Oh, no
still
question.
50-year-old technology.
Absolutely.
Mm.
And I think the other thing as well is the number of people that you can carry. With the microlight license as it stands, you can only take yourself and one passenger. Whereas I think the advantage with having a PPL is that you can fly aircraft that sometimes have 4 seats or even 6 or more. So that's another advantage of the PPL versus the MPPL. But generally speaking, when you go flying, it tends to be with one other person, if you're lucky. And it's very rarely that I found myself in a position where it would be nice or convenient to take more than that. Although my wife would like a 4-seater aircraft, but I think it's more so that we can increase the amount of luggage we can carry as opposed to the number of passengers. But yeah.
Yeah. No, I think my PPL, I think, says I can take 9 passengers or something. I don't know.
Wow.
Yeah, I
That's
might be
that's quite
wrong. I
impressive.
just remember reading something going, where are we going to put them? So just coming back to obviously when you decided with a friend that you went different routes, but to get your license. So what was your kind of training journey like then?
Well, it was a little bit strange because at the time, so I did my training with Mark McClellan from Airsport UK, and he and the other flying instructor, Paul Lanham, have since become my very close friends, and they've just been amazing. But when I first met them, they were operating out of Old Sarum, an airfield not far from Salisbury. And many people who are aware of Old Sarum will know that there are some very sad circumstances around the closure of that airfield, which was one of the great hubs for aviation, very much like Popham and the problems that it's facing as well. But unfortunately, that airfield closed pretty much after I'd had 3 or 4 lessons with Mark. And that forced Mark to find somewhere else to train his students from. And that's when we moved to Spire View, which is the airfield that we fly out of. And then COVID hit. But by that time, I'd already been really bitten by the bug. And so I decided that I was all in, and I'd committed, and I'd actually ordered a EuroFox at that stage, a brand new one. And the COVID pandemic did me a little bit of a favor because lots of people became quite concerned about their financial position. And as a result of that, they had a number of orders pulled, which meant that I moved up the waiting list quite quickly. And because I'd been saving for 10 years, I was ready to go. I had the money set aside. And perhaps I should have been a little bit more shrewd and thought more about my business. But at that time, I was being a little bit selfish and I thought, I'm going to go for it. So we bought my aircraft and I collected it just after the COVID lockdown ended. And from that point on, I learned to fly in my aircraft, which incidentally also saved me money because when you use the flying school's aircraft, you pay for the aircraft. And obviously having my own meant that I could use that instead. I say save me money. I was trying to think whether that's the case or not, but actually, yeah, it did work out better for having my own aircraft. So, and then I stuck with the EuroFox for a number of years, and it's just an unbelievable aircraft. Really, really lovely, so forgiving, beautiful to fly, really responsive, just a great aircraft.
Yeah, I think you've got maths similar to mine in terms of it saved you money. Good way of convincing you. And go back to the EuroFox there, we'll talk about your aircraft in a bit more detail in a moment, but I can't remember exactly how I found your channel. It might have actually been, I was looking at EuroFox, so that might have been where it was. And I remember seeing your aircraft and I was like, just the nice colors and everything, and the dash layout and everything. It was just fantastic. So yeah, I was smitten by your aircraft as well. And even when you said you'd sold it, not that I was going to be in a position to buy it anyway, but there was a part of me that went, if I'd known, would I have done something? I wonder how much you sold that for. And right, Dale, go back to looking at shares.
Yeah, I was amazed actually because at the time I sold the aircraft, I wasn't thinking about selling it. It was one of those confluences of circumstances that just kind of conspired, and eventually I kind of went along with the flow. Even I had gone to Popham and we'd seen our current aircraft, well, that model at the Popham Microlight show, and Eve was very interested in traveling to Germany. And actually the EuroFox you could very, very easily travel to Germany in, but we wanted to travel a little bit more quickly, and we came across my current aircraft, and Eve sat in it and she said that she really loved it. So just out of curiosity, I got hold of Nick Buckley from Buckley Aircraft Finance and just kind of asked him what the figures would be and what he thought that I would be able to get for my aircraft. And he phoned me back within a day with a quote and also a buyer for my aircraft. So I didn't even think about advertising it. I didn't even think about whether or not I wanted to go through it. And it just felt like an opportunity to move forward. And so that's what eventually led to me selling it. If I had the money, and I do not, but if I had the money, I would love to have had both, because as I say, that EuroFox is it's such a good recreational aircraft. Really, really lovely.
And for people that I'm sure most people have, but those that haven't watched your channel, so what did you replace the EuroFox with?
So I replaced the EuroFox with a WT9 Dynamic, which is an aircraft built in Slovakia by a company called Aerospol. They've been building these aircraft for around 35, 40 years, and they're a composite-bodied one of the chaps that I met recently at Popham calls them plastic aircraft. But yeah, they're made of carbon fiber, carbon Kevlar, little bits of titanium and other bits. And it's a lovely aircraft, incredibly comfortable. And because it's quite slippery in terms of the fact that there aren't many draggy features to it, it is significantly faster, despite the fact that it's got exactly the same engine as my EuroFox had. So I've got almost twice the cruise speed for the same fuel burn, and with the same engine, which is just remarkable. But yeah, it's a little bit more intimidating to fly, and it's taking me a while to adjust. But I think that's true of anyone who's a pilot. If you change type or change it to a different aircraft, it takes a while to learn the skills that you need to fly that aircraft, because it's going to be different. And that was a bit of a surprise to me. Yeah, I have to admit.
Yeah, I think from this I do know about you, I think you're like me. I think lots of other pilots think you're quite hard on yourself. I think we are hard on ourselves in terms of, but I think that's a good thing because we want, I guess, always striving perfection. Even that,
Absolutely.
good enough might be good enough. But and again, just you mentioned about the speed. That's the main thing I've noticed compared to flying the Cessnas to the Sky
Yes.
Ranger. It's much slower. I'm still struggling to get my head around how long it actually takes. So, what was your cruise speed in the EuroFox, and then what's your cruise speed now? Then, just for comparative.
Absolutely. Well, that again tickles me slightly because my cruise speed in the EuroFox was around 70 to 80 knots. Now, looking back, I actually flew my EuroFox a little bit like an old lady driving a car. So um, the buyer of my aircraft now regularly flies it at between 90 and 100 knots. But I I flew it at 80 to around 80 knots. That was my cruise speed. And I think probably the reason I did that was because I'd become accustomed to flying in the C-42. And for some reason, I just felt like I was giving the engine a good thrashing if I pushed it beyond sort of 5,000 RPM. But those people who have Rotax engines will know that actually 5,000 RPM is where they kind of live, if not higher. And so, yes, the aircraft normally cruises between 90 and 100, but I tended to poodle around at 80. But that's part of the pleasure of flight, I found. It was just, being up in the sky amongst the clouds, looking down on the earth, and it gives you incredible perspective. The WT9 at similar engine speeds is probably between 110, and I generally cruise at 5,000 RPM at 125 knots, burning between 12 and 15 liters an hour. So it's incredibly economical, and I couldn't drive to the Isle of Wight on the fuel that I burn flying there, which is just incredible.
Yeah, that's really impressive performance. If I compare that to my experiences, so in the Cessna 172, normally cruising around 2,200 RPM. It's obviously a very different engine, burning
A
around,
Lycoming, I believe, is that right?
yeah, about 28 liters an hour of fuel, and you're
Yeah.
probably doing around 100, 120 knots. And then the Sky Ranger, I fly that maybe a bit like you, Miss Daisy, at about 200 RPM in the
Yes.
cruise, doing around 75, 80-ish. Um,
Perfect.
and it's dribbling at
Yeah.
like 11 liters an hour or something ridiculous. So I think like you said, it probably can handle a bit more. I think part of my brain goes, I'm used to flying at, just under 2.5. 4 is a lot, is what it
Yes.
feels. But I think the other thing I've noticed about my own personal, I guess, flying behavior, if that's the way I'd explain it, is especially with the microlights, other people I've flown with, and very impressive, are very happy to show me, look at this 60, 70-degree bank of turn, and look at this. And whereas I try to fly very smoothly, it doesn't say it always happens smoothly, but I try to fly smoothly and everything. Whereas other people, oh, you can really throw it about. I'm like, I don't want to throw it about. I want to be smooth, and my passengers have a smooth experience. But yeah, the climb speed is amazing, isn't it, on the lighter
It
aircraft?
is. No, I think you're right. I think there are lots of different ways of approaching aviation, and I think, as is my experience, if I look back at when I first went up in the air, I would argue that most people, when they go for a first flight, or even if you're sitting as a passenger, would just like to view the world from above. And although it's impressive to see acrobatic maneuvers or more advanced maneuvers, they do take their toll on the body. And that can sometimes make you feel a little uncomfortable, even if you are a seasoned pilot. So I'm very much like you. The I find flying quite therapeutic because it takes me away from work and the pressures of the world. When I step onto the airfield, straight away, there's nothing I'm thinking about other than making sure that the aircraft is safe to fly. I know what's going on with the weather. I've done all my checks. I plan my route. And for that reason, it's almost like a Zen-like state that you adopt when you're flying. And for me, again, most of the flights that I have are for enjoyment and recreation. But I have to say that generally speaking, I make myself 1 in every 4 flights go through a general skills test syllabus to try and hone my skills, because one of the things that I want to do is, especially with Eve, who is profoundly anxious about flying, is to make sure that she's confident in my skills. So that is something that I regularly do. I'll try 1 in 4 flights to make sure that I run through all or parts of the general skills test just to keep myself current. Or I'll go flying with one of my instructors, Mark or Paul, who I mentioned earlier, and they push me a little harder and try and get me to improve myself, which I think is important. But there has to be that balance between pleasure and keeping current. I think that's important. So yeah, I understand where you're coming from with that.
No, I think what you're doing there is really good for a couple of reasons. One, obviously, it's good to practice things, isn't it? Otherwise, you go, "Oh, when was the last time I did a stall?" "Oh, when I was a student, 8 years ago, doing whatever it was." And I think the other thing, I did a video on it recently, is obviously different personalities need different things, but I think it's good to have purpose. And
Yes,
if the purpose of your 1 in 4 flights is that, it's another reason to go flying and have something to do and have an outcome that you're going for, isn't it? So I think that's good.
absolutely. No, I think you're quite right. And uh, it's not always possible to take someone with you. I think sharing the pleasure of flight is great, but yeah, I agree with you. It's useful to have a purpose to it as well. No,
Mm,
no, I quite agree.
yeah. But just that point there, I think I wouldn't say I'm a loner, but I'm definitely happy with my own company. So most of my flying is on my own. I think mainly because of the time that I am able to fly. Like my daughter, she likes to go flying, but I'll end up being able to go Monday lunchtime. So obviously she'll be at school or something. So I'm quite happy to go, just do it on my own. And my wife doesn't like
Yeah, no,
flying.
no,
So,
absolutely. And that goes back to what I was saying earlier about the fact that, it can be a little bit of therapy because it means that you're escaping from everything. Um, but it is odd. I do really enjoy sharing the flying, which was another reason why we started the YouTube channels. I mean, you as well, you like to pass on your knowledge and your experience. And I love your videos because they're beautifully structured to give you a little bit of information so that you learn something. And whenever we're sharing information, I think that's really important because y- y- one assumes that as a pilot, everyone else knows what they're doing. And so it's quite nice to be able to share experiences, even if they're not particularly good ones, just so that it's reassuring. But not only that, you can learn from other people's mistakes in the hope that you don't make a mistake that might have potentially disastrous consequences. But another nice thing about making these videos is that you do end up sharing what you're doing. And I think that was important to me as well. My family who live around the world and in different countries and in different parts of the country, they often, what are you doing? Where are you going flying? What's happening? And so I think that's another nice thing about social media and flying. Not only can you be quite solitary with it, but it also means that you can share it in different ways and sometimes inspire people as well. So yeah, the aviation community is fantastic. And yeah, there are lots of different reasons why you should get involved with it.
yeah, that's a good segue actually onto the next part. So you've kind of hinted at to why you started the creation of content, mainly, I guess, for your family. But did you expect people to connect with you and your content the way that they have?
I beg your pardon?
Did you expect people to connect with you and your content the way they have? Because it's clear from reading comments, people, I guess, have some sort of affinity with your content, and then you obviously hear people on the radio recognizing you, and so it's not just, "Hey, I create these videos for my family." It's, there's a following, isn't there? Did you expect that to happen?
No, absolutely I didn't. And as you have personal experience of, there are some amazing people out there in the world, and there are also some very peculiar individuals. And when you first start making these videos, generally you do it because you're proud of what you're doing, or you might want to share what you're doing, or you've been inspired by watching someone else's video and you want to give back in the same way that you were given to. And so when I first started, there were a range of reasons, mostly sharing it with family and friends. I never, ever ever expected people to be interested in watching some old man fly around in the sky. Um, but what happened was once I started posting these videos, people started giving me little snippets of advice, or I would bump into someone who'd watched my video and they would give me a little bit of feedback. And very quickly, I started to make some really incredible friends and form relationships that would never have been possible had it not been through YouTube and social media. So there are lots of times when I've looked at the channel and I felt like giving up. And the times that I tend to feel like giving up are when I take it too seriously. Because what happens is that you create a video not expecting anyone to be interested. And then all of a sudden it's quite popular. And you think, oh, that's brilliant. I'll make another one. Um, and then it may or may not be popular, or it may or may not give you the reception that you wanted. And as a result of that, you start to feel a bit despondent. And then because you're despondent, you try and one up yourself and then try and get the next video out to be even better. And the more seriously you take it, actually, the more it grinds you down and the more negativity you tend to feel and project. So what I've since learned is that I should go back to grassroots with the videos, which is just to make a video when I want to have a bit of fun, post it. If people like it, great. If they don't, well, that's great. Look for a different video. I don't mind. But the people I've met from making these videos is by far the greatest advantage. And I don't think that it would have been as well. I mean, I love flying, but it is so nice being able to meet people who have the same passion as you and share experiences. And YouTube has just been, very, very instrumental in making that happen. So I'm really, really glad I did it. It is character building, and you have to kind of brush off some of the negativity and try and be quite thick-skinned about it. But I'm sure you've had personal experience of that yourself.
Yeah, like you said, there's peculiar people. I think my main thing with, everyone's entitled to their opinion, is when people aren't constructive with the feedback. That I'm happy for someone to say that that was a terrible landing, but with some constructive feedback as to what I could do to make it better. Because I'm sure this isn't the case in all cases, but some people probably have never flown a plane before, and they're telling me that, so. And I guess that leads me on to a question. You kind of touched on it, but maybe more specifically, I think you kind of said you've adjusted your mindset now. But when you are flying and you are recording, and obviously we all make that choice as to whether we upload something, don't we? But do you feel some kind of pressure to perform when the video's in the
Uh,
cockpit?
I don't know if it's I think the thing about it, and you've just alluded to it yourself there, is that when you are producing a video, you're very keen for it to be something that you can reflect on as a flight, and for it to be a nice memory of what you've achieved that day. So I always try and think about, because even I often sit down together, and when it's raining, when it's a miserable winter and we can't go flying, and we look back at the time we sat and ate cupcakes on the beach on the Isle of Wight at 8 o'clock in the evening, having just flown there after work, or we've flown to Bolthead and it's been just an amazing day, and we've been able to walk down into Salcombe and spend some time. So it's really lovely to reflect on that. And so when I put those videos together, I try and make it a nice memory and a story about what it is that we've done. But I think one of the things that I also find difficult, and the performance pressure I feel, is that often there are aspects of it, for example, pre-flight checks. Pre-flight checks are something we do every single time. And if you cannot have a video that covers all of your pre-flight checks, your pre-takeoff checks, your engine starts, all of those aspects. If you filmed all of that, it would just be an incredibly long and tedious video. But I do feel often compelled to include a lot of that, which I would normally cut out. Because if you don't, then someone will say, well, I didn't see you do this and you didn't do that. And so in a way, you start to defensively add material because you don't want to be thought of as being a bad pilot or criticized because people didn't see you do what they feel is important. So I I don't feel performance pressure because now, as we've said, I try and focus more on just making them for myself. But having said that, I sometimes feel defensive because we don't like to be criticized and we don't like to be thought of as being negligent or have our competency questioned when we know full well that we are all very, very motivated by making sure that we do everything safely, not only for ourselves, but for the people that we fly over and fly toward or around. So that's the only aspect so in a way, it's horrible to say it, but the only performance pressure I feel is to try to appease the trolls who really I shouldn't care about. But that's human nature, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's definitely human nature for, I guess, certain personalities, which sounds similar. I think, deep down, I'm creating content that either my goal is to create content that I think I would like, but the reason I ever started making any content of any sort, but especially aviation content, was, like you said, the aviation community is amazing, but also in a weird way, you've got to be in it to understand the detail. So I still remember
Yes.
that the real reason I started creating any aviation content was it all seems like a mystery from outside. I even remember, like like you mentioned about the medical at the beginning, I was so keen to make a video on the medical after I did it because I had it in my head from other pilots I'd spoken to. They didn't say this specifically, but they made it sound like you're going to be on a treadmill, you're going to be running for an hour with oxygen masks on, and you have to do 800 push-ups. And I'm like, I mean, I don't think I'm unhealthy, but I'm not like an athlete. And then you go there and they go, right, cover your eye, up on the knee, ECG. You're like, oh, it was just like a trip to the doctors. And so I wanted to then do a video on what's it like to get your class 2 medical, because I'm sure other people like me are sitting there worried going, "Oh, well, I'm not, you know, 10% body fat and some," you know what I mean? Like, so that's
Yeah.
why I create content, is to,
It's dispelling the myth and making it accessible. When you imagine, as you quite rightly said, you felt like the medical was going to be like something out of Top Gun, but in actual fact, all they were doing is to make sure that you were going to be able to command the aircraft safely. But no, I agree, and I think that's a very valuable type of um, video to make. And again, then it changes the way that you behave as a creator. And I'm trying to I have done a few of those, especially the one I did on Europe, because when I flew to Europe, there are different license types that you have. There are different aircraft types that you have. There are lots of different ways in which the legislation is different depending on what aircraft you fly. And because I couldn't find the information that I wanted, when I eventually managed to tease my way through it, I thought it would be really helpful to say, well, this is what you do. Have a look at the information I put together. Hopefully, then that will help you find what you need if you want to fly the type of aircraft that I fly with the type of license that I've got. And when you're on YouTube and you think, well, my washing machine is broken down and I fancy having a go at changing the motor on it, if someone's done a video to show you how to do that, well, then that's great because it helps you out. And I think that kind of content, and I'm really impressed by the fact that you do that, and a bit envious too, because I think that's a nice way of giving back, as opposed to just flying around and filming it for the fun of it, which is what essentially I enjoy doing most.
that's a good segue again onto that. I enjoyed that video as well. And obviously you have flown abroad, and you mentioned obviously one of the other reasons for getting a new aircraft was so you can visit Germany and things. So I'm interested to know a little bit more your own experience of doing that, because I don't know how long I've had my pilot's license now. 4 years? I don't know. I think from year one, or even whilst I was still learning, I'm going to fly to Latuke. I'm going to fly to Latuke. I'm going to fly, and here we are, and I still haven't done it yet. And I don't know. One element of it is definitely time.
Yes.
But again, I've watched your videos as well on flying in Europe. But there is that still part of my brain that goes, but I don't know if I can do it. The other part of my brain goes, lots of other people do it, so you must be able to. But there's still that part of my brain goes, I'll just go to Shobden for breakfast.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think part of the problem is that, and it's human nature, it's fear of the unknown. Until you've done something, you don't know how hard it is, or how easy it is. And actually, most of the time, if you look back on almost all of the experiences that you've had, the anticipation or the fear of the process is actually worse than doing that thing. And flying in Europe for me was frightening before I'd done it. And then once I was doing it, I was thinking, much like your medical, I was thinking, well, why was I so worried? It's fairly straightforward. All you've got to do is just know these few rules, make sure you know where to look for the rules if you don't know the rules, and there you go. It's straightforward. And I think flying in Europe is supremely satisfying. The really nice thing about it, and as I find it difficult to kind of articulate, but the sky feels bigger and the land feels bigger, and you can see weather patterns much further away than you can in the UK. And so I think it's very exciting, very pleasurable, and a hell of a lot easier than you would expect to fly to Europe. All you've got to do is make sure that you've got the right forms filled in, and all of that information is readily available. It's not hard. You should do it.
Yeah.
Do a video.
Oh, and how many times have you flown abroad now?
So I have to say that was my first time flying abroad, but we did it over 4 days, I think it was, in total. So we went through Slovakia, we went through the Czech Republic, we flew through Germany, the Netherlands, and then over the channel back into the UK. And we did that over a few days. We could have done it in one go, but I think it would probably have been a bit too much. And given the workload in terms of the fact that it was a new experience, I just wanted to ensure that I knew exactly what we were doing and that everything was right. But we have plans to go back in about a month or two's time, because Eve's mother, it's her birthday, and we would quite like to fly there rather than drive or fly commercially or catch the train.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Excuse me, sorry about that.
And you mentioned at the beginning about like finding balance and things like that. So what does flying look like today? I'm assuming obviously you're at work during the day, I guess, or 7 days a week, 5 days a week, something like that. So what does flying look like on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis, assuming the weather's cooperating?
Absolutely. Well, I think it's much easier, as you know, in summer when the daylight hours are a lot longer. I mentioned earlier that sometimes if we finish work early, it gives Eve and I an opportunity to nip off in an afternoon and then get back in the evening. And it feels like we've spent a huge amount of time away, just because we've had that small adventure. Generally speaking, now my life used to be far more complicated when I was working extensively in hospital, but now Eve and I have our own surgery. Life is a little bit more easy and a little easier to structure, I should say. And because of that, we generally tend to have weekends free and then the occasional day here and there. But because we have our own business, what that means is that we can structure an odd week, especially around summertime, so that we can take time off and escape. And I have to say that until Eve and I got together, because I was so committed to my career, I would never have had the time. And I'm so pleased that Eve, my wife, has encouraged me to start to get a better work-life balance, that I'm taking more time off and doing that. But that's only been possible because of all the decades of work that we've put in to get where we are now. So yeah, now generally speaking, it's weekends, occasional evenings, and if we can organize a day off here or there, then that's what I do. But with the UK weather being as it is, it's great because most of the time we can work hard so that when we do get a window of good weather, we can jump straight in there and take advantage of it.
Yeah, and it's good that you can share that experience together, or even if you say it's sharing a hobby, isn't it? Because then it makes it more that you're doing something together, as opposed to, oh, I'm nipping off down the airfield on my own, and I don't see you at work, and now I don't see you in the evening either
Yes,
because
that's right.
you're off playing a plane. And you mentioned obviously some of the good memories that you've already had about, when in the winter you might look back at when you went and had, cakes on a beach or something. Is there any kind of really standout moment in your aviation journey so far? It could have been when you were training or since you passed that really sits with you as like, yeah, that's a fantastic memory that I'll always cherish.
Yes, in fact, there are quite a few, and that's what's remarkable. And I'm not sure whether it's the aviation that's the largest component of it, or just because I'm now just taking more time to make those memories. But certainly, one of my most favorite memories that's aviation related is the time that Eve and I got engaged. So I conspired with some of my staff members and also with the chaps at the airfield to propose to Eve. And the staff at work really kindly got some old bed sheets and they cut them into letters with my proposal, which we then pinned on the ground. And then I flew Eve over the proposal and got her to read it, and was how I proposed, and that was fantastic. So that was one of my most favorite memories. Um, some other memories I think are of when I collected my first and most recent aircraft. Those were just phenomenal because it was a lifetime of saving, a lifetime of work, and a lifetime dream that was met. So I think collecting the EuroFox was incredible, and flying back with Mark from Slovakia, that was incredible too. And probably one of the first times I was taken out by my friend Paul Lanham, and he flew me over the clouds and demonstrated to me the ways in which you could use the aircraft to its full extent and within safe limits. But that was breathtaking as well, and it was just so magical to be in this other world above the clouds. It was amazing. So yeah, so many, but those are the standout events I think that make it for me, or made it for me.
And was there, I guess, what was the time when you realized I am now a pilot? Did that happen before you got your license, or was was it your solo, or when was the point that you were like, actually, I think I could call myself a pilot now?
Yeah, I think it was coming back from a trip that we'd taken, and I can't remember where it was, but it was in summer. And we had come back fairly late, and it wasn't sunset, but we were probably about 20 minutes away from sunset. And we came back to Spire View. And on final approach, because the light was just starting to fade, I could see this large shadowy object. And as we came down, I realized that there was a tractor right on the threshold. And we've only got a 420 meter strip. So I thought, my word, what on earth is a tractor doing there? And as it turned out, one of the airfield chaps had decided to mow the airfield, which is fantastic because it was doing us all a favor. But unfortunately, it had broken down right on the threshold. And because it was so late at night, he wasn't expecting anyone to be coming back. But I remember seeing that aircraft there and thinking, that's unfortunate, no problem. And then I just hopped over it and then just gently landed. And I felt so proud that it didn't even bother me. And that was the first time that I thought to myself, I'm doing all right. Now, I didn't even want to go around. I didn't need to go around because I'd been able to assess that, the weather conditions were beautiful. It's a nice, calm day. I had plenty of space. I knew exactly the parameters of my aircraft. And it was wonderful. I just felt so in control at that stage. And that gave me a great deal of confidence. And interestingly, that is what I missed most when I changed aircraft types, because I had become so competent, not competent, I'd become so confident with where my wheels were at any point. I knew exactly when they were going to touch the ground. I could tell how it was going to handle in certain conditions. I knew how it would behave in wind shear. When I switched to a different aircraft type, I all of those markers, the feel that I had for the aircraft was totally different. And I felt like I was a student again. And that really hurt. But I remember that. I'll always remember that one evening coming back and just thinking, no problem. I'm happy to land it. Tractor doesn't bother me.
And that probably happened though, didn't it, over several years with the EuroFox
Yes.
having that confidence. So even though you still have that experience and knowledge in your new aircraft, it's not going to take the same amount of time,
No.
but it's not going to be, oh, I've been flying it 6 months, and if a tractor turns up, I just pop over it. You'll probably be like, oh, I'm not ready for that. But, so it's still, it's just, yeah, like you said, it's just about getting comfortable, isn't it? I guess that's like you said
Exactly.
earlier.
And by that time, I had almost 400 hours on the EuroFox. So, I was confident with it. And also it was coming to it because it was summertime. I've been flying so much in that season that that this is why currency is so important, because the more and more you fly, the more and more you become aware of how your aircraft behaves, what its limitations are, what your limitations are, and that's why currency, I think, is really important. And that's the one downside of aviation in this country is, unfortunately, the weather doesn't always play ball.
Yeah, that's definitely true. And that tractor incident actually brings on to another question that I was going to ask is, has flying kind of changed how you think about risk or decision making, both obviously clearly within aviation, but has it made you think differently either in your work or in your personal life in terms of how you kind of think about risk and decision making now that you've got the pilot experience?
I think that's a really, really good question. And I think that people who are interested in aviation tend to be quite motivated, and not all are, but most are very protocol driven in terms of their approach. So I think, like riding motorcycles, you are aware of the danger and you're aware of the potential consequences, but you're also aware that the more meticulous approach you have and the more you train and the more skills you gain, then the safer that you can make it for you, your passengers, and anyone else who might be potentially at risk from your actions. Um, so, no, I think what I like about aviation is it's a nice complement to the work that I do, because in healthcare and medicine and surgery and dental surgery, the important aspects are that you make sure that you have good knowledge and that you work and practice and fly within the limits of your competence. And you need to build those competencies in order to be better so that you can make things safer. So I think, no, I think it works well for me both ways. So I think that from my job, I have developed techniques for making sure that I work in a safe way. And that lends itself quite nicely to flying. And in flying, it reinforces the need for following those protocols, which then complements what I do for my career. So yeah, I think they're very complementary. But yeah, but I think generally speaking, people who fly tend to be quite motivated individuals, quite keen to learn anyway, and maybe a little bit geeky and a little bit sciencey.
Yeah. So you mentioned about motorcycles. Do you ride a motorcycle? You have in the past?
Yeah, well, yes, I've always ridden motorcycles. Fairly recently, though, I've stopped, and the reason why I've stopped is because aviation to me is now my hobby. And there are loads of things that I would like to do. I'd like to rebuild a motorcycle. I've got an old Land Rover that I've been meaning to change the chassis for, a galvanized chassis, for a long time. But I've now resolved that really what I don't want to do is to be a jack of all trades. So I want to focus on the aviation. That's my main hobby. Any spare time that I have, I want to be investing in that. And then at work, I want to be good at what I do at work. So I'm trying now to make sure that I focus entirely on that. So I've got rid of my motorcycle, and you could easily argue that they're not mutually exclusive. But again, I think motorcycling is something that you need to keep up to date. One of Mark, my flying instructor, he was very keen to learn to ride a motorcycle, and very quickly he realized that it's another thing that you need to do regularly in order to stay safe. So yeah, I put that to the side, but yeah, motorcycling was what I did before I had an opportunity to get involved in aviation.
That's interesting because I also have motorcycles, and to the point you made earlier, there's only three things that I can definitely think of in my life that make me not think about work. Motorcycle, if I'm on the bike, everything else is gone because I'm so busy watching to make sure everyone isn't killing me.
Yes.
Secondly, is I used to race drones and fly RC helicopters.
Oh, fantastic.
I think the
Yeah.
same thing because you're having to concentrate on what you're doing. You can't be thinking about a meeting or how something is or isn't going. And then obviously, as you mentioned again with the flying, you're so committed and focused on that. There isn't time to be thinking about other things. I think with the caveat of same with probably not so much said about my own risk assessment. I might still go on the motorcycle if I've had a slightly bad day because I find that it will clear my brain. I think with flying, I may be sometimes a bit more hesitant in terms of am I really in the right frame of mind? I know
Yes.
flying
Yes.
will calm me down, but what happens if
Yes.
not? So yeah, it
Yeah,
sounds
I think you're right. They're all highly skilled activities, and that's what's nice about them because they do draw your mind to so that you're totally absorbed in that. But equally, you do have to be in the right place to engage in those activities. So as much as they provide you with an escape, you need to be in the right place in order to enjoy them. And that's one of the things that I learned very early on, is just how, human limitations is one of the things that we're taught. But it is amazing how important that is. And whether that's motorcycling or aviation or even flying drones, you could do some quite impressive damage with one of those if you lose concentration.
especially the radio control helicopters. Every time you crash it,
Yeah.
it was so expensive to put back together. You're just like, I mean, you don't want to crash anyway, but this big incentive is it's going to be expensive. Yeah,
Yeah,
I
they're
think
not cheap.
no. I think what you just said there is something that I've realised more recently because I think I also have lots of interests, and my problem with my interests, again, personality wise, is I have to find out everything about them.
Yes.
Get fully. I can't just go. Oh, I'll have a little look at that. I'm all in on all the things, and then as you,
Yes.
especially as you get older and have different commitments, and then you start not questioning your life, but just deciding, okay, what are the priorities? Because I can't. We all know we can't be good at 100 things. I mean, we can't be great at
That's right.
100 things. We can mainly be slightly good. So yeah, I'm going through a similar process of trying to work out what my priorities should be. So that's just insightful. Um, in your opinion, what makes a good pilot?
Um, a lack of arrogance and somebody who's able to set aside their ego. I think that's really, really important. I think that you should be constantly humble and open to learning and realize the limitations of your skills. For that reason, I think somebody who is constantly seeking out ways to improve makes a good pilot. And even though I've talked about the fact that at one stage I felt incredibly comfortable with that aircraft, so much so that I wasn't phased by a very complex situation, one that would maybe phase me in my new aircraft as things stand, I think that it's important to, irrespective of how confident you feel, not to allow your ego or any arrogance to creep in, because that you're no longer safe. So I think that's it. To be open and open to learning.
100% agree. And is there any common mistakes that you've seen of people that perhaps do have perhaps a bit of an ego and it leads to them, having issues or errors?
Yes, I think thinking about recently spending a lot of time at airfields. One of the things that worries me slightly is how people tend to be a little blasé with their approach to pre-flight checks. And if you look at the data, there's a channel, and I can't remember the name of the channel at the moment, that I watch that talks about aviation safety. And they look at all the data and go through what causes accidents. And it's amazing how simple, basic things, time and time again, are responsible for accidents. Forget that things that are overlooked on pre-flight checks, if they're done at all. So even something like sumping your tanks to make sure there's no moisture in them. So I think probably the thing that occasionally, and fortunately, I've been really lucky. I've not seen anyone do anything too awful, but it does worry me occasionally watching people prepare themselves for a flight, at how dismissive, or I'm not sure, ignorant maybe, of the need to be diligent with their pre-flight checks. And I know that there will always be things that get missed or overlooked, and everybody's human. I've done exactly the same. Occasionally, you think, "Oh, right, well, I went through the checklist. Did I do that? And well, I better go and look and do it again." And so there'll always be things that you miss and forget. But that's probably the only thing that I've seen on a number of occasions where I've thought, "Oh," but
Mm.
and when I do see them, I do speak out. I remember we were at a local airfield fairly recently, and we saw a student get in, and I didn't even see him once look at the outside of the aircraft. And so we just said, "Look, don't you think you ought to check that puddle on the floor there?" And unfortunately, he did look under the aircraft. But that's probably the only thing. The thing is, and when you're flying, because there's so much separation, you don't really get to see how other people fly. And I suppose that's why when people watch our videos and see what we're doing and they think, "Well, I wouldn't do that," they feel compelled to comment. And as you said, provided it's delivered in a very constructive and helpful way, then I'm always receptive to it.
Yeah. I think, like you said, I think maybe it's complacency, because I think I'd say I'm, again, not perfect. So I'm sure I get complacent on some things, I would guess. But I've had comments where people have said to me, "Oh, why are you checking the aircraft out? It was already checked this morning." And I'm like, "Yeah, but I didn't
Yes.
check it. I'm sure it's fine, but for the
Yes.
time it takes, I want to know that nothing's loose, or it's all the oil is not suddenly evaporated, in the last 2 hours." I'm sure it hasn't, but at least
Yep.
I know. And the same with
Anything can break.
exactly, yeah. And I think even with just the simple things, again, I don't include it in all the videos because, again, not everyone. Some people are interested. You can't please everybody. Some people like all the detail, but
Exactly.
even with, like, the downwind checks, I've had people with me going, "Why do you say you're checking the undercarriage?" Well, because that's just what I do. I know it's down and fixed and it isn't
Yeah.
retractable, but one day I might be flying a retractable one, and if I miss that out,
100%.
I'll just be like, "Why did you land about the wheel down?" "Oh, because I stopped doing that." Do you know what I mean? So I think it seems stupid to some people, but
Yeah.
in my head, it makes perfect sense, because if I do
Yeah.
the same checks I should do, regardless of the aircraft I fly, in my head, for the effort, which is minimal, and if I am in a retractable undercarriage, I'll be going undercarriage. Oh, no, it's not down and fixed, is it? Right. That's the theory, but yeah,
Absolutely. No,
yeah.
I think that's always the way to do it. Follow the rules, follow the protocols. And the other thing that I've had to occasionally pull myself up on is it's very easy to recite those things without actually physically acknowledging them. So what I try and do now is make sure that every time I go through a list in my head or I'm speaking it out aloud, touch that thing that you're checking, physically make a mental note of whether you look to see whether the engine temperatures and pressures were correct, rather than just saying engine temperatures and pressures and not really physically acknowledging the fact that they're correct, because that's why you do those checks. And sometimes you can just go through and say, da, 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 because you're focusing on the landing or the airfield is coming up too quickly. And actually, don't worry about the airfield. You can go around. Just make sure that your undercarriage is down and the temperatures and pressures are correct, and there's enough fuel if you need it. So yeah, I think you're right. Definitely.
I think you raise a good point, because I'm probably not as confident as you in terms of maybe going and speaking to someone when I don't, I guess, don't feel I'm the expert. So I'm happy to give someone some feedback if they ask for it. But a perfect example of what you just said there, I remember when I was learning to fly in a Cessna, trim wheel all the way down, all the way up, back to middle. And then one instructor I had one day went, "What are you doing?" "Well, just checking the trim." And they're like, "And is it good?" "Yeah." Goes up and down. They're like, "Well, do you not want to look at the back and check that?" I'm like, "Do you know what? No one's ever told me that before." And it was
Yeah.
ever since then, there are things that, like you said, I check everything. But what's
Yeah.
amazing, back to that point, when I've flown with other people, they also do the same thing. Don't look.
Yeah.
And then people, again, I don't tend to speak up, but then if there's someone, most people I have flown with do then say to me, "Oh, by the way, if you think there's anything you'd do differently, let me know." And so
Yes.
then I will happily go, "Well, yeah, you check the trim. Yeah. Did you actually check it was moving the trim at the back?" "No, I don't think I've ever checked." Well, yeah,
And
'cause
that's
again,
why it's important to share these experiences as well, because again, a little thing like that could save your life. Um, and even with social media, looking on YouTube, even if you don't agree with the way somebody flies, if you don't like the way, watching that video is actually really useful, because then you can think to yourself, I'm not going to do it the way that Geoff Cockrell does it. I'm not going to do it the way that Dale does it, because look, he missed that and he could have done that. But whatever you get out of it, I think it's important to share information, because it could save your life. And exactly as you said, did you look at the trim tab? Well, no, I never thought to. Well, maybe you should.
I just moved the wheelie thing. That's what it says.
Yeah. I followed the checklist.
Yeah. Well, I've really enjoyed the conversation. I've got more things I probably want to discuss, but just conscious of time. So, in terms of trying to wrap up the podcast, I've got two kind of final sections. The next one is what I call the quick fire round. So
Yeah.
I'll ask you some questions, and the rules are, short answers, whatever comes to mind, as opposed to
Gotcha.
deep, meaningful thought. So, favorite aircraft?
Diamond. One of the twin engine diamonds.
They've got a very unique sound, haven't they?
Yeah, I do. I
Yeah.
like the look of them. Yeah. And I mean,
Yeah.
they're not too different in appearance to the WT9, which I fly. I also like the WT10, but the Diamond is lovely. I think that would be my dream aircraft if I had 1.2 million to blow.
As I say, just the purchase cost, but the running cost, I think it goes a bit more fuel. So. Favorite airfield, either that you've been to or even not visited yet. If there's a favorite airfield that you have that you think, yeah.
I've got a good group of them. I'm sorry, I know I'm supposed to keep it concise. Goodwood is one that we always go to. That's one of the first places I flew. Lovely cafe, lovely environment. The team there are just awesome. I love Deanland as well, and I love Bolt Head. Those are my favorites in this area.
Okay. Paper, chart, or iPad?
Paper. Sorry?
Paper, chart, or iPad?
iPad.
Most underrated skill in flying?
Most underrated. Looking out the window.
Good. And then short grass strip or long tarmac runway?
Short grass strip every time.
Okay. And then I think my closing question for you would be, if someone is listening, thinking about learning to fly, but they've either put it off or they think it's too expensive or whatever reason they might have in their head, what would you say to them?
You're going to die. Do it before then.
I think that's a great way to end the podcast. So that's it for this episode of Pilots Squawking. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you want to find out more about Geoff and the Flying Dark Lord, what's the best way for people to find out more about you and follow you?
Probably the YouTube channel is the best way to go. We're at Flying Dark Lord. Other than that, we're on Instagram. I think we've got Flying Dark Lord and my wife, Flying Dark Lady. And we've also got our dog, Flying Dark Dog. So you're welcome to get in touch that way. And we're always so delighted that people come and say hello to us, whether we're at an airfield, or I even had a chap in Tesco's come and say hello the other day. So that was absolutely awesome.
Yeah. We'll put some links in the show notes and in the video as well. So again, thanks, Geoff, for your time. Hopefully,
it's really good to see you again, and thanks again for inviting me on. I hope I don't put people off your channel, but you've got a great channel, and I learned
really
so much
it.
from it myself. So it's fantastic.
So hopefully everyone that's listening, you've enjoyed this video. Make sure you do follow and subscribe on whatever platform it is you're listening on. And if you know someone who's into flying, please feel free to share this with them as well. We've got more conversations like this coming with pilots from across aviation. So please stay tuned. So thanks very much for listening, and we'll see you in the next one. Thanks again, Geoff.
Cheers.